Hi everyone, I'm Allie. Join me in creating this Eden leather ruff featuring some nice earthy colors and showing really how to do a binding rather than a knot at the end, as well as how to use a button that may be too small to go through your leather. So we are problem solving on this beautiful leather wrap, working and giving you some ideas. Remember, there are tons and tons of different things that can be used for this bracelet, but if you do need the materials, check below the video in the description to get links to online. So to begin our Eden leather wrap, we are going to be using some 2mm leather, which is a nice thick leather, but sometimes will create problems if you're trying to do a knot and it looks a little bit big, or if you are trying to add your clasp to it and the clasp won't fit through the leather if you have a button. So we're going to solve both of those issues with some of our thread. I have here 20 inches of the 2mm leather, some 6mm gemstones, some tile beads in copper. Those are 2 holes, so we'll see how to do multi-hole. And then 3 different colors of 11OC beads. Remember, if you need exact details, go below the video in the description, and you can get links for all of that on our site. I'm also using a size 10 needle, and I'm working with the green dragon thread size 6. This is great because it's really going to fade pretty nicely into the leather, because I want my leather still to be my main focus, which is why I'm using a thicker leather rather than a 0.5 or a 1 or a 1.5. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my 20 inches of leather and I'm folding it in half. We're going to make a loop. Now, like I said, you can go ahead and just do an overhand knot and knot that together, but not only does it use more of the leather, but sometimes that knot becomes the focus. Instead, what we're going to do is create a binding around the leather with a loop big enough to fit our button inside of. So to do so, I have about 5 feet of my thread. I'm going to go to the bottom of the thread after folding the leather over, and we are simply going to tie the thread around the leather. So I'm just going to take my needle and thread right here, and they're at the other opposite end, and I'm just holding on to the thread. And see how I'm just doing one knot. I'm going to take that to the other side, wrapping it around the piece, and we're going to knot it again. Now, if you are a glue person, you can grab some Loctite glue after the fact here and glue this on. But by the time we wrap around and tie a couple more times, you are not going to have to worry about that. So here at the end, I'm going to continue wrapping around, taking those threads to the opposite side. And this also becomes part of the design and the look. Wrapping that back, and then once again, knotting those thread ends together. I'll then pick up my thread and needle, and we're going to loop between the threads just to hold it in place a little bit more and to get it a little bit more substantially placed. So ready? We're doing that tight knot here. I'm going to do that again. Square knot, right over left, left over right. Knotting that down. And don't be afraid to go in with like a chain nose pliers and really pull that knot tight, because we do not want it to come apart. You want to make sure that your button can fit inside comfortably, but that it's not too big that the button will slide in and out. So I'm just going to push it up a little bit. Now we're going to take this thread that's attached, again, the needles to the other side, and we're going to wrap this around multiple times. So we're just creating this nice wrapped look. Go slow. You want to make sure that you have that nice look for it. And now what we're going to do is take our needle and thread, and we are going to sew between those 2 pieces of leather from the bottom. This is going to hold this in here, creating a little bit of a knot here. You're then going to take your thread and needle through the loop, and then once again back through the leather to the opposite side to hold that, pinching it together. It'll hold it in place, and on that, at the back here, we will tie those 2 thread ends together. This is going to make that knot nice and stable. And then you can go in, like I said, after the fact if you want to, and you can glue that down, up to you. But now you are ready to go, that you have that nice look of that bound leather with your dragon thread. And we're going to get ready to put our beads inside between the 2 pieces of leather. So now to add in beads, it's nice to do this as we get progressively bigger or wider to fit our 6mm beads. Our 6mm bead is also the same as our 6mm tile. So they're going to sit equal in length. We're going to start with one seed bead, then go 2, 3, and 4 to get to the same width of that bead. So how we're going to do this is we're going to grab our first color of our seed bead. We're going to put that onto our size 10 needle. And we are going to push that in between the leather, kind of right after that thread loop that we did. From here, we're going to do a figure 8. My thread's going to go around this bottom leather, through the leather, sewing through the seed bead. And what that's going to do is just loop that thread around that side of the leather. We're going to take our thread and needle around the top of the leather, through to the middle, and once again through the seed bead. This first one is always going to want to pop up. Just use your fingers and kind of push that in place and give a nice tight pull on your thread. See how that bead separates out the thread then, or separates out the leather, and you have a nice starting spot. From here, you're going to go over the thread and come out through the middle. So we're always going over the thread, coming out through the middle, and then we are going to add 2 beads. After we add those 2 beads, you're going to take your hands, and you see how I'm pinching the leather? You're going to set those 2 beads in between, go over the leather, come back through those 2 pieces of leather, making the loop go over the top. And if you can get back through those seed beads at the same time, that's great. But usually you'll just need to come through those 2 seed beads then. 1 and 2. And once again, go over the leather. And there you have those 2 in. Now this side here is not actually connected yet. So you know you're going to have to go one more time through the beads. You want to make sure as you go around the leather that each side you can see the leather wrapping to the top, or the thread wrapping to the top of the leather. So I'm going to go around the top of the leather, underneath, and this is always going to be the same, whether or not I'm using a multi-hole bead or a one-hole bead. Go through those seed beads, and your thread comes to the top, and you're ready to progress. You're going to wrap underneath the leather, come onto the center here, and once again add 3 beads. So we're increasing again to get to that 4 count. Whatever your widest bead is that you're using, that's how you're going to increase the seed beads to that size. Going over the top of the leather then, pinch those beads between. So underneath and come out the top here of the leather. Go through those seed beads. And whatever you do, you want to keep it consistent. So once you're through the top of those 3 seed beads, go around the leather to the interior, underneath, back through, or if you can, sew through those seed beads at the same time. If you do try to do that all in one felt swoop, make sure you do sew through all the seed beads. So see how I just connected onto one there? And make sure your thread gets lined up when you look at the sides of this leather wrap. You want to look at it and be able to see those threads coming from both the top and the bottom of the piece. You're going to notice that every other row, you're going to see 2 strands of thread that sit to the side of the beads. 2 there, 2 there, 2 there, 2 there, as you come through and connect onto the piece, going through. The last one ended at the top. Now you're ready that you're ending at the bottom. Again, I'm going to increase to 4 seed beads. Why? Doing the exact same technique, going through adding my 4 beads, wrapping around the leather, coming back through the beads, wrapping around the leather, and then the leather is going to end at the top this time of the project. After you have your 4 seed beads in a line, you can progress to any of your beads because they're that thickness. So again, just to show, you really can use any bead for this design. We're keeping it to nice and simple with a very thought out and planned matter. Coming through here to the bottom over the top of the leather, we're always going to want to come out to the interior before we add our next bead. 1 hold 6mm bead goes on. Take your fingers and kind of pinch that down in here. Thread once again goes over the top of the leather, under the leather, and back through the bead. Once again then, make sure you bring your needle over top of the leather. It's easier to see this in action with the bigger beads. And then once again, over the top of the leather, underneath, needle through, and bring your needle through to the top of the piece. And there you have your nice bead in there. You want to make sure when you are looking at this that you don't squash the beads too close together. Leave a little bit of space for them to move around. And that way you won't have the factor that if you bend your bracelet, beads start popping to the top or to the bottom. From here, we're going to go underneath the piece. And I'm going to get ready once again to add some more beads. I'm going to space out some of my 2-hole tiles and my gemstones with some of my seed beads. So once again, going 4 wide, going over top of the leather, underneath the leather, scooting back through those 4 seed beads, and then once again bringing the needle out on the opposite side over top of the leather. Coming over top of the leather, catching underneath then and going through those seed beads, and once again coming over top of the piece. See how that just gives a nice tight look the whole way along the leather, showing then that 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 pattern as we go around and through before we add our next bead. When it comes to adding the next bead in our series here, we can go for the 2-hole tile. We're going to go through the first hole of the tile, and it's going to be business as usual. So you're going to think about it as just a 1-hole bead, not even thinking about it as a separate or as the same bead with 2 holes. Going over the top, tucking underneath the leather, going back through the tile, and once again through to the top of the leather on the opposite side. Making sure your thread lays nicely, go underneath, back through the tile, and once again to the top of the design. From here, you're just going to take your thread and needle, go over top of the leather, come in through the center, and then go through the second hole of the tile bead. So very simple, just think of it as 2 separate beads then, and 2 separate holes. Then again, going from the top of the leather, I can't stress this enough, through over the top to the bottom, through, come out over the top. There is definitely a difference when you're looking at it between a nice leather wrap where it sits nicely, there's a little bit of spacing, or where it's bunched up and you can tell that the beads are sitting a little bit off because they have not been trapped in by the thread. Another suggestion from a viewer is that you can use, if you like the working with it, 2 needles crossing through the bead, looping around the leather, and crossing through the next bead. Going in here then, I'm going to go through and come through the center of the leather, and then get ready to progress with my next sets of beads. And my next bead set, I'm going to go back to that Spanish olive, and once again continue on the way, making sure that I'm wrapping around the leather, back up through the beads, and I'm not done at that point. I still have to come back through the beads one more time. So there's 2 strands through the beads, wrapping around the top. You're always going to have 3 strands through the beads. This is also great as we get into spring and summertime because that thread is super stable and you can wear this anywhere you want to and not worry about these threads breaking and the beads coming off. So if you're making the leather wrap, and you can see here as I'm doing it, I did a little pattern of 2 white rows, then a brown chocolate row with a little design in the middle, and then kept going with that round tile look. And I'm a little bit to the center here in the middle of my center tile. And I'm running out of thread because I usually start with less than 5 feet, so you don't have to watch me pull thread and thread and thread through a video. So what happens if you run out of thread? How are you going to add it? I do not like to add thread to the exterior of the bracelet. I like to add it to the interior. So this tile is a great spot to end to add my thread. I've gone through the first hole of the tile 3 times. Again, we're always going through the beads 3 times. And I've gone through the second hole 1 time. I'm going to take a new piece of thread and I am going to tie it around the thread that already exists. So right now I'm not getting the thread that's onto the needle in the knot. I'm just tying on a new piece around that. I'm going to pull that knot that I just tied as close as I can to that tile bead. From here, I'm going to take the needle off the thread end, and now I'm going to tie these two thread ends together. The reason I'm doing this in the middle of the piece between the leather is because you will feel the knot if you do it to the exterior. So if you tie a knot on the exterior, you will feel this. With this thin dragon thread, you will be able to easily conceal this, tying this square knot then right over left, left over right, pulling if you need to with your chain nose pliers a little bit tighter to make sure that that knot disappears within the bead. So again, left over right, right over left, giving a nice tight pull. And then we're going to thread the other needle and continue on as normal. Once we're done, we'll do a little thread zap and burn down those thread edges where you've joined the thread without noticing that addition of the two pieces together. Once you get to the end of your Eden bracelet here, you want to make sure that your leather lines up, that all your beads are sitting nicely. They're not squished too close in the design and the pattern here. Whatever you choose, so many options. Coming out at the end, I have a repeat of the beginning where I do 4, then 3, 2, 1, and then I did a second single bead. Remember, what we're going to be doing is sewing on the button rather than taking the button through the leather because it can't fit. So if you have a button that you really want to use, have vintage buttons maybe in your house, this is a great way to use them. I'm coming out the center of the leather and I'm going to grab a button for the bottom below so that way it sits up a little bit and has room for the leather to go underneath it. From here along the top, I'll add some color to the top, go with my cream, Spanish olive cream, and then I'm going to sew down through the button on the other side. On the other side here, I'm also going to do 1 11-0 seed bead and let that come back down towards the end. So see how I have a little bit of extra thread there? We're going to tighten that up so we don't see that extra thread. That button is going to sit right over top of that last bead. So we have that last bead. I brought the thread out after it. I added my 11-0. We're now going to tuck our needle and thread between bead number 1 and 2. So between that last bead and the bead right before it. And that's going to allow that button to sit right at the top. From here, I want you to go back through the button, taking your thread and needle to the opposite side of that bead, going through that 11-0 seed bead, because this is our clasp, this is our closure. We want to make sure that we get another strand of thread through it, through the beads, back down through the button, through the 11-0 seed bead, and then once again coming out between those last 2 green Spanish olive beads. From here, you're going to take your thread to the opposite side of those beads, and we are going to do just like we did in the beginning, and we're going to create a wrap, really pinching those 2 leather ends together, going through multiple times and getting that nice and tight. Now, what to do with the extra leather? I'm going to keep it just for a nice edging effect and get it close to the project. 1 strand, 2 strands, just having that at the end as part of the design. You can tie a knot there, and what I'm going to do is take my thread and needle around that button 1 more time. So my thread's short here. I'm going to then grab a little bit of glue. I'm using for my glue some of the E6000 glue. I'm going to drop a dab onto that and onto the thread ends. After tying the knot, you can bring this in between just like we did on the other end. Tie those 2 through and grab that thread and needle here, bending my needle, going through the leather end and separating out those 2 pieces to wrap around. Give a nice tight pull to that, gluing that thread down. You can tie knots also if you want to, but that button's just going to sit right on top of that end piece. Now the reason it's not going to slide off the end is because we sewed between those last 2 beads, pulling that one to the top. Once you're all finished then, oh, my tube wants to be in there, your thread or your button then will sit right inside that loop that you created with enough space sitting on top of that 11-0 seed bead to sit right underneath. The extra strands of leather will tuck in, and you'll just see very minimalist loop at the bottom with that button to the top to finish up your design. So again, I'll do a little tiny bit of glue here, little tiny bit of glue there. That's optional. It will hold and finish up the design. If you want to cut the leather closer right after the glue, you can certainly do that as well to finish up this fun Eden design. There are so many options, and we have a couple other leather designs as well, picking up some random beads here from grab bags, picking up the beads from your bead box, or looking through your stash for multi-hold, single hold, stacking super duos, using tubelets, and really designing how you want with the option of sewing the button to the top of the leather, and rather than doing a knot, binding the leather together with your dragon thread. Thanks so much for joining, and remember, if you are a Best Bead Box subscriber, you already have all the materials to make this awesome Eden leather wrap. Hopefully this gave you some ideas. It's a good way to use up some bead soup from previous boxes, and if you want to check out the bead box or the Bead Box XL, make sure to look below the video to get links to shop with us online. As always, we love if you comment as well to help out other community members that may have additional questions or that you can give additional insight and info to. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for our next inspirational video.